The sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed across the training grounds of the Blackmoon pack. Alexandre Lambert, the fiery young alpha, clenched his fists as he stood toe-to-toe with Joshua Scythe, the pack's sharp-tongued beta. Their fights had become a tradition, each encounter a tempest of rage and unspoken emotion. "You're pathetic," Alexandre spat, his emerald green eyes blazing with anger. "Always acting like you're better than everyone else. You're just a beta." Joshua smirked, his dark eyes glinting with amusement. "And yet I keep pinning you to the ground, Alpha. Maybe that says more about you than it does about me." The pack members gathered around them murmured, some laughing quietly, others whispering about the latest spectacle. It was no secret that the two young leaders couldn't stand each other, their rivalry dating back to their early teenage years. What began as childish quarrels had grown into something far more intense, volatile, destructive, and inescapable. Alexandre lunged at Joshua, his wolf growling in frustration. But Joshua, ever calm and calculated, sidestepped with ease, grabbing Alexandre's arm and twisting him into a hold that left the alpha struggling to break free. "Let go!" Alexandre snarled, his pride taking a heavier hit than his body ever could. Joshua leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "I'll let go when you learn to control your temper, Alpha." The tension between them crackled like a live wire, and for a fleeting moment, something unspoken passed between them, a pull neither could explain nor admit. "Enough." Elder Marlowe's voice cut through the chaos, her commanding presence silencing the murmurs of the crowd. She stepped between the two, her sharp gaze flicking from Alexandre to Joshua. "You're supposed to lead this pack together, not tear it apart with your petty squabbles. Grow up, both of you." Joshua released Alexandre with a shove, his smirk returning as he turned to leave. "Try not to trip over your ego next time, Lambert." Alexandre's fists clenched at his sides, his wolf howling in frustration. He hated Joshua's calm dominance, hated how the beta always seemed to get the upper hand. But more than that, he hated the way his heart pounded whenever they were near, his body betraying him in ways he couldn't understand. As the crowd dispersed, Alexandre remained behind, staring at the ground. His wolf was restless, growling in confusion. He brushed it off as anger, nothing more. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered that there was something he wasn't ready to face. Unbeknownst to them both, the bond between them had already been written in the stars. It was only a matter of time before fate forced them to confront the truth. The night of the blood moon brought an air of unease to the Blackmoon pack. The wolves gathered in the clearing, their eyes fixed on the crimson orb hanging low in the sky. For centuries, the blood moon had been a symbol of destiny, a time when the spirits of their ancestors revealed the truths that could not be denied. Alexandre stood near the edge of the clearing, his arms crossed as he avoided looking in Joshua's direction. He hated these pack gatherings, hated being so close to his rival. But tonight felt different. His wolf was restless, pacing within him, its growls vibrating through his chest. Joshua was on the opposite side of the clearing, his posture relaxed, but his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. He could feel the tension in the air, the way the moonlight seemed to heighten every sound, every scent. And then, without warning, his gaze locked with Alexandre's. The world seemed to stop. A powerful surge of energy shot through them, leaving them both breathless. Their wolves howled in unison, the sound echoing across the clearing. "Mates!" The realization hit them like a thunderbolt. Alexandre's eyes widened in disbelief, his body trembling as his wolf pushed against him, yearning for the one it had claimed. Joshua's usually calm demeanor faltered, his jaw clenching as he fought to process the impossible truth. "No," Alexandre whispered, shaking his head. "This can't be happening." Joshua took a step back, his fists clenching at his sides. "This has to be a mistake." But the elders were already murmuring among themselves, their expressions grave. Elder Marlowe stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "The bond is undeniable. The moon has chosen you as mates. This is your destiny. I won't accept this." Alexandre shouted, his voice cracking with anger and fear. "I refuse to be bound to him." Joshua's wolf growled in response, its instincts warring with his own stubborn defiance. "As if I want this any more than you do," he said, his tone cold. The pack watched in stunned silence as the two stormed away in opposite directions, their wolves howling in frustration. The bond had been revealed, but neither Alexandre nor Joshua was ready to face the truth, or each other. The forest was quiet, save for the crunch of leaves beneath Alexandre's boots. The bond pulled at him relentlessly, like a thread wrapped tightly around his chest, dragging him back to Joshua no matter how far he ran. He refused to acknowledge it, his pride and fury blinding him to the inevitability of their connection. "I won't let this happen," he muttered to himself, his fists clenching at his sides. "I don't care what the bond says. I'm an alpha, I choose my own path." But the choice wasn't his. The bond was a force beyond his control, as much a part of him as the wolf that stirred restlessly within. Behind him, a familiar scent filled the air, earthy, sharp, and undeniably Joshua. Alexandre's wolf perked up, its growl softening into a low whine. "I knew I'd find you here," Joshua said, his tone neutral but edged with irritation. "Running away won't change anything." Alexandre turned, his green eyes blazing. "I'm not running. I'm thinking." Joshua raised an eyebrow, his arms crossing over his broad chest. "And what, exactly, are you thinking?" "How to avoid me forever." "Newsflash, Lamba, the bond doesn't care about your stubbornness." "Stay out of this," Alexandre growled, taking a step closer. "I won't let some stupid bond dictate my life. I'm rejecting you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Joshua's wolf growled in response, its dominance flaring. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his dark eyes locking onto Alexandre's. "Rejecting me?" Joshua's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Do you even know what that would do to the pack? To us? The bond isn't just about you, Lamba. It's about responsibility. It's about keeping this pack strong." Alexandre faltered for a moment, his chest heaving as conflicting emotions raged within him. But his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. "I don't care," he said, his voice trembling. "I'll find another way. I won't be tied to someone like you." Joshua's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. He wanted to argue, to yell, but he knew it would only fuel Alexandre's defiance. Instead, he stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming. "You can reject me all you want, Alexandre," Joshua said, his voice low and steady. "But that bond? It's still there. And it's not going anywhere." The tension between them was suffocating, the bond thrumming like a live wire between their hearts. Alexandre turned on his heel and stormed off, his wolf howling in frustration. Joshua watched him go, his chest heavy. He didn't want this bond either, but denying it was like trying to deny the pull of the moon. No matter how hard they fought, they couldn't escape each other. The following days were a blur of awkward silences and simmering tension. The pack elders, unwilling to let their leaders remain divided, demanded they work together to plan the upcoming harvest festival. "This is ridiculous," Alexandre muttered under his breath as he stood beside Joshua in the pack house meeting room. "Agreed," Joshua replied coolly. "But here we are. So let's get this over with." The two stood side by side, poring over logistics and schedules. Every brush of their hands, every accidental meeting of their eyes, sent sparks racing down their spines. The bond thrummed incessantly, demanding acknowledgement. "I'll handle the decorations," Alexandre said, his tone clipped. "You can deal with the food." Joshua smirked. "Of course. Wouldn't want to risk you burning the pack house down with your cooking." Alexandre glared at him, his wolf growling low. "Do you ever stop being insufferable?" "Not when it comes to you," Joshua replied, his voice dropping just enough to make Alexandre's stomach flip. The tension between them grew unbearable, their bickering barely masking the unspoken emotions simmering beneath the surface. By the time the meeting ended, both were exhausted, not from planning, but from fighting the bond that pulled them closer with every passing second. The night of the festival arrived, and the pack gathered in the clearing, their spirits high as they celebrated the end of the harvest season. Alexandre stood near the bonfire, his arms crossed as he watched the festivities. "You could try smiling, you know," Joshua said, appearing beside him. Alexandre rolled his eyes. Why are you even talking to me? Joshua's smirk softened into something almost genuine. Because ignoring you clearly isn't working. Alexandre's retort died on his lips as Joshua's dark eyes met his. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them and the bond that pulsed like a heartbeat between them. I hate this, Alexandre said quietly, his voice trembling. Joshua's expression softened. I know. But the bond didn't care about their hatred, their pride, or their fears. It pulled them together like magnets, their wolves howling in unison beneath the full moon. Before Alexandre could stop himself, he reached out, his fingers brushing against Joshua's. The touch sent a jolt through both of them, their breath hitching as the bond flared to life. This doesn't mean anything, Alexandre whispered, his voice shaking. Joshua's gaze darkened, his wolf growling softly. Keep telling yourself that. The days after the festival were a blur of confused emotions for Alexandre. His usual focus on pack duties waned as he grappled with the pull of the bond. Every time he saw Joshua, his wolf surged forward, yearning for its mate. He hated how easily Joshua seemed to handle it, remaining calm while Alexandre felt like he was falling apart inside. Joshua, however, wasn't as unaffected as he appeared. The bond pulled at him too, making every interaction with Alexandre a test of his resolve. His instincts screamed at him to claim his mate, to protect him, but he knew Alexandre wasn't ready to accept it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Joshua found Alexandre training in the clearing. Sweat glistened on Alexandre's skin as he worked through a series of attacks, his movements sharp and precise. You're pushing yourself too hard, Joshua said, stepping into the clearing. Alexandre didn't stop. What do you care? Joshua's jaw tightened, his wolf growling softly. I care because if you collapse from exhaustion, the pack suffers. Alexandre spun around, his green eyes blazing. Stop pretending this is about the pack. You think you can just waltz in here and lecture me? I don't need you, Scythe. I don't need this bond. Joshua took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. You don't have to like me, Lamba. Hell, you don't even have to trust me. But you can't ignore this forever. The bond is part of us now. Fighting it won't make it go away. I'm not fighting it, Alexandre snapped, his voice cracking. I'm rejecting it. Joshua's wolf roared at the words, his instincts flaring in protest. He closed the distance between them in an instant, grabbing Alexandre's wrist. You think this is easy for me? Joshua growled, his dark eyes locking onto Alexandre's. You think I wanted this? I didn't ask for this bond either, but here we are. And whether you like it or not, we're stuck with each other. For a moment, Alexandre was silent, his chest heaving as he struggled to contain his emotions. The weight of Joshua's words sank in, the truth of the bond pressing against his resistance. I hate you, Alexandre whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. Joshua's grip softened, his gaze searching Alexandre's face. Then hate me. But don't run from this. The tension between them was electric, the bond thrumming with unspoken emotion. Alexandre's wolf whined, torn between pride and instinct. For the first time, Alexandre didn't pull away. After their confrontation, a fragile truce settled between them. Alexandre still avoided Joshua whenever possible, but the outright hostility began to fade. The pack noticed the shift, though no one dared to comment. One evening, Alexandre found himself on the pack house balcony, staring out at the forest bathed in moonlight. His thoughts were a tangled mess, his wolf restless. You're brooding again, Joshua's voice came from behind him. Alexandre stiffened but didn't turn around. What do you want, Scythe? Joshua stepped closer, his presence steady and grounding. You're not as good at hiding your feelings as you think, Lamba. Great. Add mind reading to your list of talents, Alexandre muttered. Joshua smirked, leaning against the railing beside him. I'm just observant. Comes with the territory of being a beta. They stood in silence for a while, the tension between them softer than usual. Alexandre glanced at Joshua out of the corner of his eye, taking in the beta's strong profile and calm demeanor. Why aren't you more upset about this? Alexandre asked quietly. Joshua's smirk faded, his expression turning thoughtful. Who says I'm not? I just don't see the point in fighting something we can't change. Alexandre sighed, his shoulders slumping. I don't know how to do this, Joshua. I don't know how to be this. Joshua turned to face him, his gaze steady. You don't have to figure it out alone. Something in his tone, soft, almost vulnerable, made Alexandre's heart stutter. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The next few weeks brought unexpected changes. Alexandre and Joshua began spending more time together, not out of choice but necessity. The pack's winter preparations required their combined efforts, forcing them to communicate and work as a team. At first, their interactions were stiff and formal, each word carefully measured to avoid reigniting old tensions. But gradually, they began to fall into a rhythm, their differences complementing each other in surprising ways. One night, as they worked side by side organizing supplies, Alexandre let out a quiet laugh. Joshua raised an eyebrow. Did the great Alexandre Lambert just laugh? Don't get used to it, Alexandre said, though the corners of his mouth twitched upward. Joshua chuckled, his dark eyes warm. Too late. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, their walls beginning to sink in a way that neither could deny. The walls they had built around their hearts began to crack, their mutual disdain giving way to something softer, something unspoken. But with the bond deepening, so too did the tension. Their walls demanded more, their instincts urging them to take the next step. One night, as the moon cast its light over the pack house, Alexandre found himself standing outside Joshua's door, his heart pounding in his chest. Are you just going to stand there all night? Joshua's voice came from the other side. Alexandre hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The bond pulled at him relentlessly, and for once, he didn't fight it. Would you like me to continue with the deepening bond, moments of vulnerability, and the progression toward their eventual intimacy? Let me know. The moment Alexandre stepped into Joshua's room, the air grew thick with tension. The bond between them pulsed like a living thing, pressing against their walls of resistance. Alexandre's eyes darted around the room, desperate for something to focus on other than Joshua standing in front of him. Why are you here? Joshua asked, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Alexandre took a deep breath, his fists clenched at his sides. I don't know. Joshua tilted his head, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. You don't know? Or you don't want to admit it? Alexandre glared at him, his pride flaring up. You're so full of yourself, Scythe. And yet, here you are, Joshua shot back, a smirk tugging at his lips. Alexandre growled low in his throat, his wolf pacing restlessly inside him. I'm not here because of you. This bond, this stupid, unbearable bond, it's driving me insane. Joshua's hand slid to Alexandre's hips, pulling him closer as their bodies pressed together. The heat between them was undeniable, their wolves howling in unison as they finally gave in to the bond. I hate how much I want this, Alexandre murmured against Joshua's lips. Joshua smiled, his fingers trailing up Alexandre's spine. Then stop fighting it. And for the first time, Alexandre did. Alexandre hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Joshua was sitting on the edge of his bed, his dark eyes watching Alexandre carefully. You're making a habit of this, Joshua said, his tone teasing but soft. Shut up, Alexandre muttered, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Joshua stood, his presence filling the room. What do you want, Alexandre? I don't know, Alexandre admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I can't stay away. Joshua's expression softened, and he took a step closer. Then stop trying. The bond flared again, pulling them together with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Alexandre reached for Joshua, his pride crumbling as their lips met in a kiss that was softer this time, but no less powerful. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Though Alexandre was reluctant to admit it, the kiss had shaken him to his core. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Joshua's touch had ignited something deep within him, something he couldn't ignore no matter how hard he tried. Joshua, for his part, was equally affected. He had always admired Alexandra's strength and determination, but now he found himself drawn to the vulnerability that lurked beneath his fiery exterior. Their interactions grew more charged, each accidental brush of their hand sending sparks through their bodies. The bond between them was undeniable, and their wolves pushed harder with each passing day, demanding more. One evening, after another long day of pack duties, Alexandre found himself outside Joshua's room once again. His wolf urged him forward, its growls insistent. "Come in," Joshua's voice called before Alexandre could knock. Joshua responded instantly, his hand sliding to Alexandre's waist as he deepened the kiss. Their wolves howled in unison, the bond finally finding the connection it had been craving. Alexandre pulled back slightly, his breathing heavy as he met Joshua's gaze. "I still hate you," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Joshua smirked, his thumb brushing against Alexandre's jaw. "Sure you do." But neither of them moved to step away. The firelight flickered in Joshua's room as Alexandre stood hesitantly by the edge of the bed, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He wasn't sure how he had ended up here again, drawn back by the bond he could no longer resist. His wolf was restless, its growls low and urgent in the back of his mind, urging him to claim what was theirs. Joshua stepped closer, his movements deliberate yet unthreatening. He wasn't trying to overwhelm Alexandre, he could see the tension in every line of the alpha's body, the conflict that raged within him. "You don't have to keep fighting, Alexandre," Joshua said, his voice soft but firm. "This is ours, whether we like it or not." Alexandre's gaze snapped to him, his green eyes blazing. "I don't need you to tell me what I already know," he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual venom. Joshua smirked faintly. "Then stop pretending you don't want this." The room was silent save for the sound of their breathing. Alexandre's fists clenched at his sides as he struggled to hold onto his pride. But the pull of the bond was too strong, and his resolve was crumbling by the second. "You think you know me so well, don't you?" Alexandre muttered, his voice trembling. "I don't need to know every part of you yet," Joshua replied, stepping closer until they were mere inches apart. "But this is something we can't deny." Before Alexandre could respond, Joshua reached out, his fingers brushing against Alexandre's cheek. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt of heat racing through both of them. Alexandre's breath hitched, and for a moment, he stood frozen, caught between his pride and the primal instincts of the bond. But then his wolf growled, pushing him forward. With a low growl of his own, Alexandre surged forward, capturing Joshua's lips in a searing kiss. The bond flared to life, stronger than ever, flooding them with a heat that left them both trembling. Joshua responded instantly, his hand sliding to Alexandre's waist as he pulled him closer. Their bodies pressed together, the tension between them giving way to a raw, undeniable need. Alexandre's hands fisted in Joshua's shirt, his usual control slipping as the bond took over. Every touch, every kiss was charged with the power of the bond, their wolves howling in unison as they finally gave in. When Joshua guided Alexandre back onto the bed, there was no hesitation this time. The walls they had built around themselves had finally crumbled, leaving only the bond, and each other. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. Alexandre stirred, his wolf content for the first time in weeks. But as his mind began to clear, the events of the previous night came rushing back, and his eyes snapped open. He turned his head to find Joshua lying beside him, his dark hair tousled and his breathing steady. For a moment, Alexandre simply stared at him, his chest tightening with a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Joshua's eyes opened slowly, and when he saw Alexandre watching him, a small smirk curved his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. Alexandre scowled, his cheeks flushing. "Don't look so smug." Joshua chuckled, propping himself up on one elbow. "I think I've earned the right to be smug after last night." Alexandre growled, sitting up and running a hand through his messy hair. "This doesn't change anything." Joshua's smirk faded, and he reached out, his hand brushing against Alexandre's arm. It changes everything, Alexandre. You can't keep pretending this bond doesn't matter. For once, Alexandre didn't argue. He let out a sigh, his shoulders slumping. I don't know how to do this, Joshua. I've spent my whole life being the alpha, being in control. This bond makes me feel like I'm losing myself. Joshua's gaze softened, and he sat up beside Alexandre. You're not losing yourself. You're finding something new, something we can only figure out together. Alexandre turned to look at him, his green eyes searching Joshua's face. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail the pack, fail you? Joshua reached out, cupping Alexandre's face in his hands. You won't fail, Alexandre. And you don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. For the first time, Alexandre allowed himself to believe it. The days following their night together were filled with awkward silences and stolen glances. Though the bond had drawn them closer, neither was ready to fully confront the changes it had brought. Alexandre threw himself into his duties, hoping to distract himself from the turmoil inside. But no matter how hard he worked, his thoughts always drifted back to Joshua, the way his touch had felt, the way his presence had calmed the storm inside him. Joshua, meanwhile, found himself watching Alexandre from a distance, his wolf restless whenever they were apart. He knew Alexandre was still struggling, but he also knew that pushing him too hard would only drive him further away. One evening, as the pack gathered for a meeting, Alexandre and Joshua found themselves standing side by side. The bond thrummed between them, a constant reminder of what they shared. Are you going to keep avoiding me forever? Joshua asked quietly, his voice low enough that only Alexandre could hear. I'm not avoiding you, Alexandre muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. Joshua raised an eyebrow, his smirk faint but teasing. Could have fooled me. Alexandre glared at him, but there was no real heat in it. Just give me time, okay? Joshua's smirk softened into a small smile. Take all the time you need, Alexandre. I'm not going anywhere. The words settled over Alexandre like a warm blanket, easing the tension in his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. As the weeks passed, the pack began to notice the changes in their dynamic. Alexandre and Joshua were still known for their sharp remarks and heated arguments, but now there was an underlying tension that even the youngest pack members could sense. The elders, who had initially intervened to prevent a rejection, were quietly observing the pair. They understood the importance of the bond not just for Alexandre and Joshua but for the stability of the Blackmoon pack. Alpha, Beta, Elder Marlowe called during a council meeting, his eyes sharp as they moved between the two. The pack looks to you for unity. Whatever it is you're working through, ensure it does not disrupt the harmony here. Alexandre bristled at the implication, his pride flaring. The pack comes first. Always, he said firmly. Joshua, standing beside him, nodded. We understand, Elder. As they left the meeting, Joshua fell into step beside Alexandre. You don't have to snap every time someone questions us, you know. Alexandre shot him a glare. I'm not snapping. I'm protecting our position. Joshua smirked, leaning in slightly. Protecting or deflecting? Alexandre growled low, his wolf stirring in irritation. Do you ever stop talking? Not when I'm right, Joshua quipped, his tone light but his eyes serious. Their banter had become a shield, something to hide behind as they navigated the unfamiliar territory of their bond. But beneath the sarcasm and jabs, both of them knew they couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. It was a rare quiet night, the pack settled after a long day of patrols and training. Alexandre found himself wandering to the edge of the forest, the crisp night air soothing his restless mind. He wasn't surprised when Joshua appeared beside him, his presence a constant these days. You've been quiet today, Joshua said, his voice breaking the silence. Alexandre glanced at him, his green eyes reflecting the moonlight. Just thinking. About? Alexandre hesitated, his fingers brushing the bark of a nearby tree. Everything. The pack. This bond. You. Joshua's eyebrows rose, but he didn't interrupt. He waited, sensing that Alexandre had more to say. "I never asked for this," Alexandre admitted, his voice low. "I've spent my whole life preparing to lead this pack, to be the strong, unshakable alpha they need. And now," he paused, his hands curling into fists. "Now, everything feels out of control." Joshua stepped closer, his tone softer than usual. "You think letting someone in makes you weak?" Alexandre didn't answer, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. "It doesn't," Joshua continued. "It makes you stronger. The pack sees it too, they see how we balance each other. Even if you don't realize it yet." Alexandre turned to him, his gaze searching Joshua's face. "Why are you so sure of this?" "Of us?" Joshua smiled faintly, his hand resting lightly on Alexandre's shoulder. "Because I've stopped fighting it. And I think, deep down, you want to stop fighting too." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant howls of their pack mates. Finally, Alexandre let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared, Joshua. Scared of what this means, what it'll change." Joshua's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly. "Change isn't always a bad thing, Alexandre. Sometimes, it's exactly what we need." As the moonlight bathed them in its silvery glow, Alexandre felt something shift inside him. He wasn't ready to let go of his fears entirely, but for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this bond could be more than a burden. The next day, Alexandre called for a training session, eager to distract himself from the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. The pack gathered in the clearing, eager to pit their strength against each other under the watchful eyes of their leaders. Joshua watched from the sidelines as Alexandre sparred with one of the younger wolves. His movements were precise, his strikes controlled, but there was an edge to his fighting that betrayed his inner turmoil. When the match ended, Joshua stepped forward. "Your form's off," he said, his tone deliberately casual. Alexandre turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can do better?" Joshua smirked, his wolf stirring with anticipation. "I know I can." The pack watched with interest as the two squared off, their rivalry still a source of fascination despite their recent changes. Their fight was fierce but controlled, each move calculated to test the other's limits. But as their wolves pushed them harder, the line between sparring and something more began to blur. Joshua finally pinned Alexandre to the ground, his hands gripping the alpha's wrists as he leaned over him. "You're holding back," he said, his voice low and steady. Alexandre growled, his chest heaving. "I don't need to go all out to beat you." Joshua's grip tightened slightly, his dark eyes locking onto Alexandre's. "You're not fighting me, Alexandre. You're fighting yourself." The words hit their mark, and Alexandre's resistance faltered. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the bond between them crackling with tension. It was Alexandre who broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I'm tired of fighting." Joshua released his wrists, his expression softening. "Then stop." As the pack looked on, the air between them shifted. The rivalry that had defined their relationship for so long was giving way to something deeper, something neither of them could deny any longer. The days that followed felt like they were moving in slow motion. Alexandre couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered at the edges of his mind. The tension between him and Joshua had softened, but in its place was something else, something he wasn't quite ready to name. Their bond, though still new and raw, was undeniable. Alexandre could feel Joshua's presence in everything he did, his thoughts often drifting to the beta even when he was trying to focus on other matters. It was during a routine patrol, the wind cold and biting against their skin, that Alexandre first felt it, the faintest pull in his abdomen, a sense of discomfort that made his breath catch. He pushed it aside at first, focusing on the task at hand. But as the sensation grew, so did the realization that something was wrong. When they returned to the pack's main clearing, Alexandre excused himself from the others and headed toward the forest's edge. Joshua, ever attentive, followed him without a word. "Alexandre," Joshua's voice was soft but firm. "What's going on?" Alexandre turned to face him, his eyes guarded. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. Something's not right. Joshua stepped closer, his expression worried. What do you mean? I've been feeling off, Alexandre said, his tone low as he finally admitted the truth. It's like a pressure inside me. And I can't ignore it anymore. Joshua's eyes widened with realization. Are you? He trailed off, not wanting to voice the thought that had crossed his mind. Alexandre met his gaze, the truth sinking in. Am I what? You're pregnant, aren't you? Joshua asked softly, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and concern. The words felt like a shock to Alexandre, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd known it was possible, but hearing it out loud made everything suddenly feel very real. I don't know, Alexandre whispered. I don't know what's happening. Joshua stepped closer, his hand resting on Alexandre's arm, grounding him. We need to go to the elders. They'll help us figure this out. The elders gathered in the center of the pack's stronghold as Alexandre and Joshua stood before them, the weight of their conversation heavy in the air. Alexandre stood tall, his pride still intact despite the unease he felt, but it was clear from the tension in his shoulders that he was struggling with this new reality. Elder Marlowe, the oldest and wisest of the pack, eyed them both carefully. You're certain of this? He asked, his voice calm but serious. I don't know what's happening, Alexandre admitted. But something inside me is changing. The elders exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them before Elder Marlowe spoke again. You may be carrying the future of the pack, Alpha. The words hit Alexandre harder than he expected. He had never thought of himself in this way, vulnerable, carrying life in a way that had always been foreign to him. His mind raced, thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Joshua placed a reassuring hand on Alexandre's back, his touch grounding him in the moment. What do we do? We'll need to prepare, Elder Marlowe said, his voice steady. There are rituals and guidance for situations like this. But most importantly, you must understand this, your bond is stronger than you realize. The child you carry will shape the future of the Blackmoon pack. Alexandre swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their expectations on him. I never asked for this, he muttered. We never do, Elder Marlowe replied, his tone gentle. But it is not your choice alone. The future of the pack will depend on how you both handle this. Joshua stepped forward, his presence unwavering. We'll handle it together, he said firmly, locking eyes with Alexandre. For the first time, Alexandre allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. The realization that he was pregnant weighed heavily on Alexandre, but it was the responsibility of what came next that kept him up at night. There were rituals to follow, decisions to be made, and most of all, his pack's future now rested on his shoulders. Joshua remained by his side, offering quiet support, but Alexandre could feel the tension between them. He wasn't sure if it was fear, or if it was the pressure of knowing what this meant for both of them. I don't know if I can do this, Alexandre confessed one evening as they sat by the fire. I've been training to lead this pack for years, but this, he trailed off, unsure how to express the weight of what he was feeling. Joshua reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here. We're in this together. Alexandre's eyes softened, but the anxiety in his chest didn't go away. But what if I'm not enough? You are enough, Joshua replied firmly. And I'm not going anywhere. As the weeks passed, Alexandre could feel the changes inside him becoming more pronounced. His body was adapting to the pregnancy, his senses heightened, his energy fluctuating, and the pull of the bond with Joshua growing stronger every day. It was one evening, as the full moon rose in the sky, that Alexandre felt it most acutely. The pull was almost overwhelming, his wolf restless, his heart racing as the changes inside him intensified. Joshua, sensing the shift, appeared at his side in an instant. "You're okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I don't know," Alexandre admitted, his hand pressing to his abdomen. "It feels like something is happening." Joshua didn't hesitate. He guided Alexandre back toward their shared quarters, his presence a calming influence. "Let's get you settled. We'll figure this out." As the night unfolded, the bond between them pulsed stronger than ever, and Alexandre couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement. What did this mean for him, for them, for the pack? But one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. The moment Alexandre stepped into Joshua's room, the air grew thick with tension. The bond between them pulsed like a living thing, pressing against their walls of resistance. Alexandre's eyes darted around the room, desperate for something to focus on other than Joshua standing in front of him. "Why are you here?" Joshua asked, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Alexandre took a deep breath, his fists clenched at his sides. "I don't know." Joshua tilted his head, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't know? Or you don't want to admit it?" Alexandre glared at him, his pride flaring up. "You're so full of yourself, Scythe. And yet, here you are." Joshua shot back, a smirk tugging at his lips. Alexandre growled low in his throat, his wolf pacing restlessly inside him. "I'm not here because of you. This bond, this stupid, unbearable bond, it's driving me insane." Joshua responded instantly, his hand sliding to Alexandre's waist as he deepened the kiss. Their wolves howled in unison, the bond finally finding the connection it had been craving. Alexandre pulled back slightly, his breathing heavy as met Joshua's gaze. "I still hate you," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Joshua smirked, his thumb brushing against Alexandre's jaw. "Sure you do." But neither of them moved to step away. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Though Alexandre was reluctant to admit it, the kiss had shaken him to his core. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Joshua's touch had ignited something deep within him, something he couldn't ignore no matter how hard he tried. Joshua, for his part, was equally affected. He had always admired Alexandre's strength and determination, but now he found himself drawn to the vulnerability that lurked beneath his fiery exterior. Their interactions grew more charged, each accidental brush of their hands sending sparks through their bodies. The bond between them was undeniable, and their wolves pushed harder with each passing day, demanding more. One evening, after another long day of pack duties, Alexandre found himself outside Joshua's room once again. His wolf urged him forward, its growls insistent. "Come in," Joshua's voice called before Alexandre could knock. Alexandre hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Joshua was sitting on the edge of his bed, his dark eyes watching Alexandre carefully. "You're making a habit of this," Joshua said, his tone teasing but soft. "Shut up," Alexandre muttered, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Joshua stood, his presence filling the room. "What do you want, Alexandre?" "I don't know," Alexandre admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stay away." Joshua's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "Then stop trying." The bond flared again, pulling them together with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Alexandre reached for Joshua, his pride crumbling as their lips met in a kiss that was softer this time, but no less powerful. Joshua's hand slid to Alexandre's hips, pulling him closer as their bodies pressed together. The heat between them was undeniable, their wolves howling in unison as they finally gave in to the bond. "I hate how much I want this," Alexandre murmured against Joshua's lips. Joshua smiled, his fingers trailing up Alexandre's spine. "Then stop fighting it." And for the first time, Alexandre did. The weeks passed in a blur for Alexandre. His body was changing in ways he didn't fully understand, and the constant pull of the bond to Joshua made it nearly impossible to focus on anything else. His mind often raced with the weight of his new responsibilities, not only as alpha but now as the carrier of life that would shape the future of the pack. Joshua was there for him, of course, but Alexandre couldn't shake the feeling that his world was unraveling. Every time Joshua's hands grazed his skin, a spark of warmth spread through him, but with it came an unfamiliar vulnerability. He couldn't remember the last time he had been this unsure of himself. One evening, after a long day of dealing with the pack's growing tensions, Alexandre found himself sitting by the fire in their shared quarters. His thoughts were clouded, the weight of what was to come settling in his chest like a heavy stone. Joshua entered quietly, his footsteps barely audible against the wooden floor. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Alexandre as he sat with his back to him. "Alexandre," Joshua's voice was soft, but there was an underlying urgency in it. "You can't keep pushing me away." Alexandre's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't turn around. "I'm not pushing you away." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear he didn't want to admit to. Joshua stepped closer, his presence filling the room. He crouched down in front of Alexandre, lifting his chin so that their gazes met. "You're scared, and that's okay. But you don't have to do this alone." Alexandre swallowed hard, his pulse quickening at the intimacy of the moment. "I don't know if I can handle this," he whispered. "I'm supposed to lead the pack. I'm supposed to be strong." Joshua's thumb brushed against his cheek, gentle yet firm. "You're already strong. You're more than capable of handling this, but you don't have to hide your fears from me. We're in this together." For a moment, Alexandre's walls began to crack, the raw emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The fear of failure, of being weak in front of his pack, of not being enough for Joshua, all of it hit him at once. But as Joshua's warm touch lingered on his skin, something inside him softened. "I don't want to fail you," Alexandre confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Joshua's eyes softened with understanding. "You won't. You never will." And in that moment, as the bond between them pulsed stronger than ever, Alexandre allowed himself to lean into Joshua's embrace, his heart opening to the possibility of love and support in ways he hadn't thought possible. Days turned into weeks, and as Alexandre's pregnancy progressed, it became clear that the pack needed to prepare for the upcoming rituals that would solidify the future of their alpha and beta pairing. The elders called for a gathering, a formal ceremony where Alexandre and Joshua would officially bond in front of their pack. The thought of it made Alexandre uneasy. He had never been one for public displays, especially not in front of his pack members, many of whom still saw him as a figure of authority, someone who needed to be strong, unwavering. He wasn't sure how to reconcile that image with the reality of carrying life inside him. Joshua sensed his discomfort and stood by his side every step of the way. He had always been the more grounded of the two, and now, more than ever, it showed. On the night of the ceremony, the full moon rose high in the sky, casting its light over the clearing where the pack gathered. The energy in the air was electric, the pack's anticipation palpable. The night after the ceremony, Alexandre found himself alone with Joshua. The weight of the day had left him exhausted, but there was something else simmering beneath the surface, a deep, aching need that he couldn't ignore. Joshua was sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes searching Alexandre's face. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Alexandre hesitated, his heart racing as he took in Joshua's gaze. He had always been good at masking his emotions, but tonight, everything felt raw. "I don't know," he admitted. "Everything feels so overwhelming." Joshua moved toward him, his presence enveloping him. "I know. But we're in this together. Let me take care of you, Alexandre." The word sent a shiver down Alexandre's spine, the intimacy of the moment too much to resist. He had fought this for so long, but now, in the quiet of the room, there was no more room for hesitation. He reached out, his hands trembling slightly as they cupped Joshua's face. "I need you," he whispered. Joshua's lips found his in an instant, soft and urgent. The kiss deepened, their bond sparking to life as their bodies moved together, seeking comfort and closeness in a way that was both new and familiar. Joshua's hands trailed down Alexandre's back, pulling him closer, the heat between them rising with each passing moment. Alexandre's breath hitched as Joshua's lips trailed down his neck, his hands working at the fabric of his clothes. Everything they had built, everything they had struggled with, led to this moment, two souls intertwined, their bodies and hearts finally aligning in perfect harmony. As they came together, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the sensation of Joshua's touch and the overwhelming love that pulsed between them. Alexandre gave himself fully to the moment, trusting Joshua with every part of himself, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been before. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Alexandre woke to find himself in Joshua's arms, his body still warm from their shared night of intimacy. There was no need for words, just the peaceful silence between them that spoke volumes. But as Alexandre stretched, a familiar discomfort returned to his abdomen. It was faint but present, a reminder of the life growing inside him. Joshua noticed immediately, his eyes scanning Alexandre's face. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. "I'm okay," Alexandre replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "Just a little sore. But I'll be fine." Joshua kissed his forehead, his hand resting gently on Alexandre's abdomen. "We'll figure this out, together. I promise." For the first time in a long while, Alexandre allowed himself to believe in that promise. The days grew longer, and as Alexandre's pregnancy continued, the pressure weighed more heavily on him. His body was constantly changing, and with those changes came a flood of emotions, anxiety, excitement, fear. It was a constant cycle that left him feeling both alive and exhausted at the same time. His packmates began to look at him differently, with a sense of awe and respect that made Alexandre uncomfortable. He was still their alpha, but now there was this new element, a vulnerability, that he wasn't used to. And with that came the feeling of being watched, of being judged, even by those who were closest to him. Joshua remained by his side, as steady and constant as ever. But even his presence couldn't ease the growing sense of uncertainty that Alexandre felt. It wasn't just about leading the pack anymore. Now, it was about being a symbol of the future, of a future that Alexandre wasn't sure he was ready for. Late one evening, when the moon hung high in the sky, Alexandre found himself alone in the clearing near the forest's edge, the cool air filling his lungs. He didn't know why he was out here, only that he needed some space, away from the expectations of the pack, away from the pressure of being their leader and carrying the child who would one day lead them all. Joshua found him there, as if guided by some unspoken force. His eyes softened as he approached, his footsteps light against the grass. "You've been distant lately," he said quietly, his voice filled with concern. "I'm just trying to figure things out," Alexandre replied, not turning to face him. Joshua stepped closer, his presence calming. "You don't have to figure it out alone," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm here. We're here." Alexandre finally turned to look at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the alpha they need me to be and the mate and parent they expect me to be." Joshua reached out, his hand brushing against Alexandre's arm in a silent gesture of support. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you." For a long moment, Alexandre stood there, his mind racing. The burden of responsibility felt like an anchor around his neck, pulling him deeper into the uncertainty of what was to come. But Joshua's words, simple as they were, settled into his heart. "I'm scared," Alexandre admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Joshua said, his voice filled with quiet understanding. "But you don't have to do this alone. We'll face whatever comes together." It was the reassurance Alexandre needed, even if he wasn't ready to accept it fully. Slowly, he reached for Joshua's hand, their fingers intertwining as he allowed himself to lean into the warmth of his touch. As the days went on, Alexandre's pregnancy became more pronounced, and with it came new challenges. The discomfort in his abdomen intensified, and he could feel his body changing in ways that both excited and terrified him. There were moments when he would be struck by a wave of nausea, or a sudden, intense ache that left him breathless. But Joshua was always there, his hand resting on Alexandre's lower back as he guided him through each new hurdle. But it wasn't just physical discomfort that Alexandre struggled with, it was the emotional toll. The once clear lines between his duties as alpha and his personal desires began to blur. He felt torn between the responsibilities of his position and the overwhelming need to focus on the life growing inside him. One evening, as Alexandre sat alone in his quarters, the weight of the day settling heavily on him, Joshua entered without knocking. He had been worried, sensing that Alexandre had been pulling away again. "Alexandre," Joshua said softly, his voice filled with concern as he approached the alpha. "You need to rest." "I don't feel like I'm enough," he confessed, his voice breaking. Joshua's eyes softened with understanding. "You are more than enough." He pulled Alexandre into a gentle embrace, holding him tightly as if to reassure him. "And I'm right here with you, every step of the way." As time passed, Alexandre began to feel more connected to the life inside him. The bond between him and Joshua deepened, as did their understanding of one another. There was an intimacy in their relationship now that went beyond physical attraction. It was a mutual respect, a shared journey towards something bigger than either of them could have anticipated. Alexandre's body continued to change, and with those changes came moments of vulnerability. His once strong frame had softened, his belly growing round with the child he carried. It was a strange feeling, one he hadn't expected. He had always prided himself on his strength, but now, there was something beautiful in the way his body was transforming. One evening, as they shared a quiet moment together under the stars, Joshua placed a hand gently on Alexandre's growing belly, feeling the subtle movements within. Alexandre's breath caught in his throat at the sensation. "Is it strange?" Joshua asked softly, his voice filled with awe. "To feel them move inside you?" Alexandre nodded, his hand resting on Joshua's. "It's surreal. I never imagined I'd feel like this. But it's also comforting, knowing that something so important is growing inside me." Joshua smiled, his eyes shining with emotion. "You're incredible," he said, his voice thick with admiration. Alexandre turned to face him, his eyes softening. "I'm not sure I feel incredible. But with you here, I feel like I can handle anything." Joshua leaned in, his lips brushing against Alexandre's forehead in a tender kiss. "You don't have to do it alone," he whispered. "I'm right here, always." And in that moment, Alexandre realized that they had come a long way, through fear, uncertainty, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. But they had found something even greater along the way: love, trust, and an unbreakable bond that would guide them into the future. As the days grew shorter and the time for Alexandre's delivery drew nearer, the atmosphere within the pack shifted. The tension that had once filled the air had softened, replaced by an air of anticipation and excitement. The Blackmoon pack had rallied behind their alpha, ready for whatever came next. But Alexandre felt the weight of the moment more than ever. His pregnancy had been full of unexpected twists and challenges, and now, as he prepared to bring new life into the world, he found himself struggling with the idea of being vulnerable. One night, as they lay together in their shared bed, Joshua's hand rested on Alexandre's stomach, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. "Are you ready for this?" Joshua asked, his voice soft. "I don't know," Alexandre admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know I'm ready to face it with you." Joshua smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Alexandre's forehead. "We're in this together. Always." The words filled Alexandre's heart with a sense of peace. He had come so far since that first night they had met, fighting, rejecting, and denying their bond. Now, they were about to bring life into the world, and for the first time, Alexandre felt certain of one thing: whatever came next, they would face it together. As the days grew even shorter, the pack began to sense that the moment was drawing near. Alexandre's pregnancy was nearing its final stages, and the air was thick with anticipation. There was an aura of expectant calm that settled over the Blackmoon pack. It was as if everyone knew the world was about to change, but they were unsure of how. Their alpha, who had once been a symbol of unwavering strength and authority, was now the center of attention for a different reason: the future of the pack was growing inside him. Joshua had been by Alexandre's side every step of the way, offering support and comfort whenever it was needed. He was more than just a mate now, he was a partner in every sense of the word. And as Alexandre's due date approached, Joshua could feel the weight of his own emotions intensifying. He wasn't just the beta now. He was about to become a father, and his world was about to change in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. That evening, as they sat in their quarters, Alexandre absent-mindedly rubbed his growing belly, his gaze distant. The full moon outside bathed the room in a silvery glow, making the entire space feel surreal. "You're quiet tonight," Joshua remarked, his voice soft as he leaned against the door frame, watching Alexandre. He could sense the unease in his mate. "I'm just thinking," Alexandre replied, his voice quiet but thick with emotion. "About everything. About the pack, the baby, the future. It's all coming at me so fast." Joshua stepped closer, his hand resting gently on Alexandre's shoulder. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he said, his voice steady. "We'll face whatever happens together. Always." Alexandre turned to face him, his eyes glistening in the dim light. "I'm scared, Joshua. What if I'm not ready for this? What if I fail?" Joshua's heart ached at the vulnerability in Alexandre's voice. He cupped Alexandre's face with both hands, his thumbs brushing over his mate's skin. "You're more ready than you know. And no matter what, I'll be here. I'll never let you face this alone." The sincerity in Joshua's words filled Alexandre with warmth. He let out a shaky breath, his heart thudding in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to truly believe in those words. It was scary, yes, but with Joshua by his side, he wasn't afraid to face what was coming. The night was unbearably quiet, the silence pressing in around them as Alexandre felt the first sharp pang of labor. He had anticipated this moment for weeks, but now that it was finally here, the reality of it hit him with full force. He hadn't prepared himself for the overwhelming rush of emotions that washed over him: fear, excitement, a deep, primal connection to the life growing inside him. Joshua had been by his side every step of the way, but now, in the midst of the chaos and pain of childbirth, Alexandre could feel his mate's strength and support like never before. "Stay with me," Alexandre whispered, his voice strained as another contraction gripped him. He could feel his body working in ways he had never imagined. Joshua was right there, holding his hand, offering steady words of encouragement. "I'm right here, Alexandre. You're doing great. Just breathe." But Alexandre's mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the pull of the bond growing stronger, and it was overwhelming. His body was changing again, and with each wave of pain, he felt more connected to the child he was about to bring into the world. The hours stretched on, each one more intense than the last. Alexandre's body was exhausted, but he refused to give up. He had a responsibility now, not just to his pack, but to the tiny life that was depending on him. Joshua remained by his side, never leaving, his eyes never leaving Alexandre's face. He could see the pain, the uncertainty, the vulnerability that his mate tried to hide, but he also saw something else: strength. Alexandre was more than capable of this. Joshua believed in him with all his heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the air was filled with the sound of a baby's first cry. Alexandre's heart surged with relief, and a flood of emotion poured over him as he looked down at the tiny, perfect creature in his arms. Tears welled up in his eyes as he held their child for the first time, the overwhelming love and joy coursing through him in a rush. Joshua's hand rested on Alexandre's shoulder as he gazed at their newborn, his expression filled with awe. "They are perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Alexandre nodded, his voice shaky. "We did it. We really did it." The bond between them, already so strong, felt like it had deepened even further in that moment. They had brought new life into the world, together. And for the first time in a long while, Alexandre felt truly at peace. He was ready for this. He was ready for the future. The birth of their child marked a new chapter, not just for Alexandre and Joshua but for the entire Blackmoon pack. In the days following the birth, the once quiet corners of the pack's territory buzzed with excitement and pride. The pack had been waiting for this moment, the moment when their alpha would bring a new heir into the world, solidifying the future of their lineage. Alexandre, though still recovering physically, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as he watched the pack rally around him and Joshua. There was an unspoken respect for the couple as leaders, more than just their strength, but for the bond they shared, which had now created the future of their pack. Joshua was always by his side, his steady presence like an anchor. Alexandre had never felt so loved, so supported. It was clear that everything was changing. The pressures of leadership remained, but now, they were shared. Together, they had created a new legacy. Late one night, as Alexandre held their baby in his arms, Joshua knelt beside him, his eyes filled with tenderness. "We did it," Joshua whispered, brushing a gentle kiss across Alexandre's forehead. "We built something beautiful." Alexandre smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "And it's only just beginning." They sat in silence for a long while, watching the fire flicker in the hearth, both lost in the moment of peace they had longed for. The weight of their responsibilities still loomed ahead, but now, there was a new lightness to their hearts. They were a family, complete and unbreakable. Being a parent was nothing like either of them had imagined. Alexandre found himself waking in the middle of the night to soothe their baby's cries, his exhaustion a constant companion. But there was something profoundly fulfilling about it. Each tiny moment, each first smile, each quiet moment of connection with their child, made the challenges worthwhile. Joshua, though equally tired, was right there with him, always stepping in when Alexandre needed a break, always offering encouragement and love. They learned to navigate parenthood together, stumbling through sleepless nights and the overwhelming joy that came with their child's every milestone. One evening, as the baby slept peacefully in his crib, Alexandre and Joshua shared a quiet moment outside under the stars. The full moon was rising, casting its glow over the landscape. Alexandre leaned into Joshua, the weight of their shared journey sitting comfortably in his chest. "I never imagined I could feel this way," Alexandre admitted, his voice soft but filled with wonder. "I always thought strength was all about power. But now, it's about this. It's about our family." Joshua kissed the top of Alexandre's head, his arms wrapped protectively around him. "Strength is in love, in vulnerability, in us. We've built something real, something lasting." They stood together in the quiet night, their hearts in sync, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The challenges of leadership didn't cease with the birth of their child. In fact, they seemed to grow as Alexandre and Joshua's duties as Alpha and Beta intensified. The pack looked to them for guidance, and though their bond had deepened, the weight of their responsibilities was undeniable. Alexandre, though more confident in his role, still felt the pressure of ensuring his child grew up in a strong and united pack. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, when he questioned if he was truly cut out for the responsibility that lay ahead. But each time, Joshua was there, a steady reminder that they were in this together. One evening, as they walked through the pack's territory, their hands intertwined, Alexandre spoke his worries aloud. "I'm not sure I can do this, Joshua. I thought I could, but it feels like too much. The weight of the pack, the future of our child, it's overwhelming." Joshua stopped and turned to face him, his gaze intense yet filled with understanding. "You're not carrying it alone. We carry it together. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep being the person you are." Alexandre swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had always prided himself on his strength, but now, in this moment, he realized that true strength came from embracing his vulnerability and accepting the love and support of the person beside him. "I'm scared," Alexandre confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "But with you by my side, I think I can face it." Joshua smiled, his grip tightening on Alexandre's hand. "We're stronger together, always." As the seasons changed, so did their family. Their child, now a few months old, was beginning to show their personality, and the pack had embraced the new addition with open arms. The once tense atmosphere around the alpha pair had softened, replaced by admiration and respect for the leaders who had not only navigated their own tumultuous journey but had also brought forth a new generation to lead the Blackmoon pack into the future. Alexandre and Joshua's bond had only deepened. What had once been a rivalry born from years of conflict had evolved into something unshakable, a partnership built on love, trust, and mutual respect. Late one evening, as Alexandre held their child in his arms, he looked to Joshua, who was watching them with soft eyes. The weight of their responsibilities still loomed, but it no longer felt like a burden. "We've come so far," Alexandre said quietly, his voice filled with awe. Joshua nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "We're just getting started." Together, they stood as leaders, as parents, ready to face whatever came next. Their love had changed everything. And the future, though uncertain, was something they could face with hope in their hearts, knowing that as long as they had each other, they were unstoppable. The years passed, and as their child grew, so did the Blackmoon pack. Alexandre and Joshua had created a legacy, one of strength, love, and unity. The pack flourished under their leadership, guided not just by their authority, but by the undeniable bond they shared. Alexandre had found peace, not in the power of his position, but in the love that had bloomed between him and Joshua. He no longer felt the weight of being alone, carrying the responsibility of the pack on his shoulders. Together, they had built something real, something that would last for generations to come. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alexandre turned to Joshua. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with a sense of finality and contentment. Joshua smiled, his hand resting on Alexandre's shoulder. "Yes, we did. And we'll keep doing it, together." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Alexandre felt a sense of peace wash over him. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. And with Joshua by his side, he knew they could face anything. The Blackmoon pack had found its place, its purpose, and its future. And it was stronger than ever.